The poem I am presenting was inspired by a prompt given as suggested writing by Mitch Levenberg, who on this day I thank for his imaginative assignments. The prompt is as follows. A ragged old man shows up at your door and claims to be a poem you misplaced years earlier. I call this piece Prose for a Poem Waiting to Happen. The dialogue is between the neglected poem and the writer, who happens to be me. The piece begins with the neglected poem speaking. The poem speaks. At last, after times long lasting, you have opened your door, but you will not let me in. Then let what you see before you, this ragged old man, bear witness in evidence incriminating you. For I charge you solely with attempted obliteration, neglect, and avoidance, shamefully, for I am your own creation. I've been down and out and cast about, the day on the run, so I run. I've learned to be none. I ran with the light, even lost my sight, and in darkness first quickened, then wandered in my flight, for I had to touch the night, to lead the way, and hear its reverberated echoes, and to quell my fright, hiding in the shadows of yesterday, searching then for tomorrow, which filled me with irreparable sorrow, as I laid still and time passed over me, until at last, in my exile would be over, for I found you once more, my birth mother. You did not take me seriously, but treated me deliriously. Don't you remember, it is you who put me together. I was a babe, I arose from a thought, a line to be sublime, but you erased me, misplaced me from the page, crumbled my already broken spirit, then tossed me away, but not so completely, for I knew down deeply you would accept me in your letting go, in your discovery what is essential. Not all poems rhyme or should. Not all poems do, which does not make them less. Yes, you knew. But forget where once I lived in your heart. So take me back out of my torment and hell. I am here, an old man in ragged attire, to re-inspire. Don't abandon me, for you have the fire in your belly to rebirth me with love, and I will be cloaked in finery and be well. And I respond, enough, old man, what claptrap, what twiddle-twaddle, what gibberish. I don't remember you, let alone recognize you. How dare you show yourself to me? The likes of you, if I threw you away, erased you from the page, or misplaced you, you needed to be, and so be gone, you trifle. And I won't cry or feel the stifle. And the old man speaks. Said he, no, I beg of you, go deeper, penetrate the abyss, see with patience and compassion what I can become, a soft, warming kiss. Let me in, don't shut me out. No, don't slam the door. Don't kill what lives within you, for in that discovery you'll find your intrinsic, limitless, still sheltered and hidden reward. Let the word be your chord. Don't steal your own thunder. Don't cast your own beauty asunder. For life is filled with the invisible and the essence, the magic and the wonder. Don't steal your own thunder. Put your hand to the page and let it reveal what it is you feel. Don't throw it away. Kneel and let it be your innermost tender symphony's epiphany, the love in you, the love you have. Yield, yield and tally, don't dally. Compose the words you carry to your music within and find the key to your own majesty, and you will be filled with true, bountiful pride, a pride humble in its meaning. Listen and hear, give birth to that which is true, abide, take the ride, to travel, to live inside. Speak you the words alive, and in your devotion you will be full with blissful emotion and transformation. And the writer speaks. Perhaps you may be right, old man, for I feel unsteady, quite a bit heady, needing the silence to think, to go deep. All right, I'll respond. I feel less despondent. Let me mark and consider your words resplendent. And remember, you tried me then, but perhaps anew I will clothe you in the majesty of words, to realize, to apologize, to fill the brim with new life and limb, where you will find your place on the page, forever young, and do not age or die. Forever then will be our bondship. So a prayer to be said, my love for you shall never be dead, until that time when you shall be sublime. I bow in quiet supplication and wait in so sweet anticipation for such a liberation. Then and thus your insinuation will be cleansed, and I will be free from incrimination. You who have been tattered and torn, and oh so verily forewarned, never forsaken, will live from dusk, dawn to morning, forever in the light, still darker, still darker, boldly in the light.
Good evening. Nacho's donkey. Rags to riches the American way. A Mexican boy named Nacho went into the countryside one day and bought a donkey off an old farmer for $100. The old farmer agreed to deliver the animal to him the following day. But on the next day, when Nacho arrived at the farmstead, the old farmer said, "I'm sorry to tell you, Nacho, but I have bad news for you. The donkey has died during the night." "Well," said Nacho, "so give me back my money." Replied the seller, "I can't. I've already spent it." "Well, in that case," said Nacho, "give me the dead donkey." "What for?" replied the farmer. "What are you going to do with a useless carcass of a donkey?" "I'm going to raffle it off," replied the boy. "Of course, I'm not going to tell anybody the donkey's dead." Naturally. A month passed by, and the old farmer met up with a boy in the town square, where he had come in for provisions. "How did that business turn out with the donkey?" asked the old man. "I raffled it off as planned," replied the boy. "I sold 100 raffle tickets at $2 apiece and cleared $198. Yes. "And nobody complained?" asked the old farmer. "Only the winner," replied Nacho. "But I gave him back his $2 and promised him another ticket for the next lottery, free of charge. I also promised him he would win, and he was happy. He's a coal miner, by the way. The mines are shutting down and he needs a job. Nacho snuck across the U.S. border, grew up, and entered politics. He had changed his name, dyed his hair bright yellow, and puffed it into a pillow shape over his head, a novelty which led to his being adopted into a wealthy real estate family in New York, which had been unable to produce normal spawn. He's not exactly normal either, they allowed, observing his enormous ego, but better than nothing, and no one will notice his orangish complexion anyway. They'll just swoon at the gleam of his name in 4-foot-tall bronze and admire his wealth, thinking it's their own. And with this license, he went about his custom of using everybody else's money. And the money, or benefit, went not to the participants of the lottery, but into his own nest. No one knew how this happened, nor much cared, for he was the Messiah. That's right. Nacho had become the Messiah. It is said that he could shoot a man on Fifth Avenue in New York and get away with it. He could walk on water and not get wet. Or if he did sink, his extravagant coiffure would serve as a flotation device. This attribution of miracles confirmed to Nacho his claim to sainthood, to exceptional powers of intelligence, and to preeminence over the poor and shiftless. The evangelicals, in especial, rose up, anointed him with oil, and called him blessed. Why, Lordy, he's white, just like us. Well, actually orange. But what with fake news and alternative facts going around these days, orange is the new white. And both are anything else you want them to be. Likewise, all the other colors of the gamut, excepting black and white, which perforce must remain separate and distinct. And it came to pass that a man who had never worked a day's honest labor in his life, nor produced a benefit for anyone other than himself and his compinches, became very rich. All this because he found many dead donkeys along the wayside and continued raffling them off along the way to other donkeys of the two-legged variety. However, our story gets better as it continues. Couldn't get worse. Thanks to the skill and art of selling dead donkeys, the boy, now a man, wrote a book called The Art of the Donkey. He and his companions are finding more and more dead donkeys to raffle off. And other donkeys are lining up to buy donkey raffle tickets. They go on sale next November the 6th. The end. Thank you.
I am a nonfiction writer, and my piece is called 40 Roosters and Still Counting. In Arroyo Grande, California, there are coffee mugs which read, "Nice town, normal people." But after spending 2 vacation weeks there, I would agree that for the most part, the people are nice. But the people are nice and normal, but not the town. After coffee one day, I headed for the park, located just behind all the shops on the main road. It was early in the morning, and though I am not a morning person, I was on New York City time and rose well before the rest of the family in the household. Reading a book while sitting on a park bench, I had the feeling I was being watched. I looked up, and from the pages, I found myself staring into the unattractive eyes of an enormous rooster with seemingly webbed feet. He was just a few feet away, but was not the least bit intimidated by my presence. In fact, he stood his ground quite defiantly, and if anyone was intimidated, I was. I rose and turned to walk away, but found there was another rooster behind me. Both looked at me as though I was supposed to do something, maybe feed them. Behind the second rooster was a woman artist who had set up a stand displaying her works for sale, oil paintings, sketches, postcards. So I decided to ask her what my experience was all about. "Ah, the roosters," she answered. "They've been here in this town for about 20 years and no one knows where they originally came from. They may have been abandoned here or wandered off from neighboring farms." This lovely woman artist was named Gay Melody Sullivan, and for hire by anyone. She painted everything: house portraits, historical buildings, seascapes, landscapes, even cars, boats, and motorcycles. "Don't you just love my name?" she asked. "I do." So amazed was I by the roosters. I hadn't really noticed her name, which was propped up on one of her paintings. Yes,
They're coming to get you.
Okay, we have an interruption. The usual interruption in New York City. Okay.
Oh, it's in New York City right now.
Well,
So far, sorry.
okay.
Town address is-
So anyway, Gay Melody Sullivan said, "Don't you love my name?" Frankly, I hadn't noticed because I was too amazed by the roosters. "Yes," I lied, "it's wonderful. Should I buy one of your postcards?" "Oh no, here, you can have one." It was a portrait of the swinging bridge, also in the park, which led to the other side of the small creek. By way of thanking her, I took her brochures and promised I would distribute them among friends and families. By this time, I had a chance to really check out my surroundings. Throughout the parking lot, adjacent to the park, there were single roosters just milling around. A few people had gotten out of their cars and were now feeding some. I decided to start counting them. I walked along the sidewalk, bordering the creek, and saw a few others in the creek trees. When a man feeding the creatures saw me looking at the trees, he told me that's where they sleep at night. At this point, I began to really notice the birds. Their heads were basically pretty ugly, but the colors in their feathers were absolutely brilliant. Greens, reds, oranges, yellows, almost like the New England falls I had so loved when I lived there. Before I headed home that day, I counted 20 roosters, amazing looking, and all individual in their looks. The following day, when I woke up, I headed immediately for the creek, wondering if I would see even more birds. After all, they were early risers and very noisy ones. As I began walking and counting, a stranger feeding a few cautioned me to be careful. "See that one over there?" he said. "Stay away from him. He attacked me yesterday on the arm when I was trying to feed his friends." A quick glance told me that was the critter with the web feet. He was probably the silverback gorilla of the group. Before heading home that morning, I counted 40 roosters, and I decided another 10 might be down by the creek, hiding in its shrubbery. Miracle of miracles, I never saw one hen. The roosters have become a tourist attraction for Arroyo Grande, and I couldn't help wondering if they would actually take over the town someday. I was told by shop people they have the right of way, and there are signs in the street that read not deer crossing, but rooster crossing. The business people in the town love the birds and are able to make a pretty good living selling souvenirs of their presence. Before I knew it, I had bought posters, napkins, note cards, all featuring these really ugly but fascinating creatures. As a New Yorker, I wondered if my city could make a living selling souvenirs of its 4 million pigeon inhabitants. The 2 million rat population was definitely a no-sell. Arroyo Grande is a stone's throw away from San Luis Obispo, which is a blue zone. This concept of blue zone is an anthropological term which appeared in the National Geographic magazine in 2005 to designate areas that have the world's longest living and happiest people. San Luis Obispo may have the longest living people, but I would bet that a greater number of Arroyo Grande's non-human population is a lot happier. And just hold up. This is what they look like, but loads of them. They've got beautiful feathers. Yeah, they are beautiful. Yeah, they're gorgeous. They really are.
This piece is called Howard. I belong to a hiking club that takes members to ethnic neighborhoods, parks, arboretums, beaches, and woods in the tri-state area. The $10 yearly dues gets you a bi-monthly sheet listing the various hikes and their leaders. Walks are graded from easy to difficult, including the number of miles entailed and whether participants can peel off to public transport if they tend to tire part of the way. There are also a few words about the terrain, flat or hilly, and there's the occasional unfriendly no slow walkers. This from the more Achtung leaders. The following will seem unkind, but it must be said that on every hike there is someone who looks or acts, well, odd. Particularly dreaded is the appearance of a one Howard, a tall, thin man in his late 70s. I've been told he was in his day a world-class hiker and hike leader, as well as a noted peak bagger. This last describes someone who has summited an impressive number of the 4,000-foot and over peaks in the country. Sadly, he is not on or even near the top of his game anymore. He refuses to accept this fact. Instead of selecting one of the easier outings or popular walks through Chinatown or Greenwood Cemetery, Howard will persist in showing up for a trek far above his present capabilities. You might say this is plucky and noble of him, a triumph of the human spirit over adversity. But the truth is, it is a triumph of profound delusion over reality. Without fail, on every hike, he will fall on a number of times, many of them serious tumbles, often sustaining bleeding wounds that require bandaging with materials from the first aid kits of fellow hikers. He will routinely have to be given lunch because he fails to bring his own food. It is almost a foregone conclusion that he will have to be helped to public transport when he cannot complete the hike, which is almost always. In one such episode, my husband hauled him from a stony ditch and brought him to the nearest hamlet for a slice of pizza to restore him. After paying for his ticket and putting him on a train, the rest of the group having gone on ahead, my husband called it a day, boarding the same train for home, but prudently sitting many cars away from Howard. I was exposed to the man only once, and that was more than enough. I vowed if he ever appeared at the rendezvous site for a hike, I would immediately go to plan B and do something else. So impossible was his behavior. He lagged far behind the group all day, doing God knows what, or to have rambling conversations with people who were walking their dogs on the trail. We had to wait a number of times until he once more came into view in the far distance. Our long-suffering leader, Julie, put up with Howard patiently all day. At day's end, the route to the Haverstraw ferry, taking us to the other side of the Hudson, Julie hurried on with the group. After seeing us onto the ferry, Julie apparently had second thoughts as to Howard's safety, to be sure he made it over a dangerous crossing. As it pulled away from the dock, to our dismay, we spied Howard shambling across the ferry parking lot. We had all hoped in our hearts that we were quit of him for the day. But no. A motorist, seeing his very slow progress, felt pity and drove him to the wharf. When the ferry captain saw him teetering on the edge of the dock, he reversed engines and returned. He then actually left the helm, got off the vessel, and helped him aboard. Like Blanche Dubois in Streetcar Named Desire, Howard has always relied on the kindness of strangers, and he has learned they will never disappoint him. No good deed goes unpunished, because the following week, on which my sister Dorothy gave her return ticket to the fundless Howard, the rumor was noised abroad that the people on our hike the week before, he had been abandoned by us. I tell you, he's damn lucky we didn't pitch him into a cistern, like Joseph's brothers in the Old Testament, to be torn apart by wild animals. Why, you might ask, does Howard not listen to reason, like any reasonable person would? No amount of explaining or remonstrating with him was never enough. He has actually been taken off the trail by ambulance and even by helicopter. I can almost picture him on the EMS gurney, eyes closed and hands folded over the pastel flannel blanket, a small, satisfied smile on his face as he is borne away in comfort. One hike leader, burned by a number of prior experiences with him, refused to allow him to participate on the hike. Howard raised such a ruckus that the police had to be called. I don't know how that turned out. There is no end in sight, as the president of the club is firmly in Howard's corner. For sure, she fears a civil suit. I would have thought that the greater fear would be a large damages suit, his lawyer arguing persuasively that any damn fool could see he was scarcely able to negotiate the way down his front stoop, much less a miles-long breakneck bridge in the Hudson Valley. In Melville's novella, Bartleby the Scrivener, an employer hires a clerk who will not work, nor will he leave the premises where he has taken up residence. To every request that he perform some simple copying task, he mournfully replies, "I'd really rather not." In the end, his kindly employer is forced to move the entire firm to another location to be quit of him, but is left with lingering guilt. Hiking is all that Howard has left of his youth and former hardy self. It would be a cruelty to deny him this one solace in his bleak life. What is the solution? Explaining will never be enough. As they say in California and everywhere else nowadays, it is what it is.
Have you ever thought about your memories? What makes a memory fade, and then others crystal clear remain with you forever through the years? My maternal grandmother came to live with us after Grandpa died. I was about 7 years old. Mary Elizabeth Bruton Dahl was her name. We called her Nana. It was not possible for Nana to live alone in her house in Jersey City, since she suffered from epilepsy. Nana's arrival upset the balance in her new home, and then my younger brother was born soon after Nana joined us. There were 6 of us in the family: my mother, me, and Nana, and my 2 brothers and father. Since it was not a big house, we were constantly doing the bedroom shuffle to accommodate everyone. The origin of her epilepsy was not clear, but Grandpa said that when she was in the hospital after suffering a miscarriage, that something happened in the operating room. I think he was right. My mother had to help Nana since her early teen years. We all watched Nana. Nana didn't talk much. Whenever I tried to write some vignettes about her, I was advised to give her a voice. But I don't remember her voice. Her voice was her condition. It ruled her life and limited it. And it was a presence in the family. This was long before social services and support groups or the internet. Families took care of their sick or disabled members. My fondest memory of Nana was the image of her sitting in her rocking chair with her head bent over her knitting and darning egg and her glasses on the tip of her nose as she intently mended socks. Working with her hands was her pleasure. She knitted, crocheted, and tatted. Nana's tapestry bag with the tortoise handles sat next to her on the floor. It contained socks to be mended, yarn, and needles. I still have the bag. My father always said that Nana had been very beautiful at one time. She was the eldest of the Bruton sisters, all lovely, but Nana was the beauty. Even as a child, I could see that. Nana had a dramatic life. She married Grandpa over the intense and adamant objections of her mother. Grandpa was a Lutheran and a dreamer and a poet who didn't always have a steady job. He was a ghost speechwriter for Jersey City political figures. He once claimed that China was a sleeping giant. How prescient is that? This was in the 1930s or early 40s. Grandma Bruton so objected to Grandpa that she would visit the parish priests in Jersey City and ask them not to marry her daughter. Eventually, Nana and Grandpa triumphed and married in the church rectory. Grandma Bruton was not happy with her daughter's independent streak and never forgave her. She would never visit Nana in her house, but would always give my mother food to bring back when my mother visited. I have never understood Grandma's Burton's intransigence. It seems so unnecessarily hurtful. Nana had lovely light blue eyes, round like saucers, and her hair was parted in the middle and pulled into a bun at the nape of her neck. It was a severe hairstyle, but the softness of her eyes and gentle demeanor offset her hairstyle. I sat across the dining room table from Nana. Often, I would catch her just staring into space. It was odd and disturbing. Even as a child, I sensed that the staring wasn't normal. Something was off. When I was older, I thought that her staring was an effect of being over-medicated, but it was more likely a symptom of epilepsy. Her seizures, spells, as we referred to them, were intense. She would fall to the floor and writhe, and her hands would shake. The spells lasted about 3 minutes. We would put a stick in her mouth so she did not bite her tongue and hold down her arms. The last time I saw Nana was on a beautiful sunny Palm Sunday. She slipped on the floor between the dining room and living room. She sat propped up against the wall between the two rooms while we waited for the arrival of the ambulance. My mother vacuumed and cleaned as she did when she was stressed out. I sat on the couch and stood watch. I will always remember the piercing sunlight that morning. We would visit her in the hospital. Mother would visit, and I would babysit my younger brother in the parking lot or the waiting room in the lobby, a task I wasn't always thrilled with. Nana was hospitalized for several months and eventually passed away. It never entered my mind that Nana wouldn't return home. Nana didn't live with the family for a long time, but I'll always remember her presence. It was an integral part of my childhood.
The name of my piece is Use Your Imagination. When I was a child, I was left in the care of my stern, elderly Italian grandparents who didn't speak English. So up and down my street I wandered, finding both older and younger friends. this little gaggle of children entertained ourselves for hours on end with little more than board games such as Parcheesi, that's if we had a party of 4, Candyland, Monopoly, Etch-a-Sketch, and for physical games we played hopscotch, jump rope, hide and seek. You get the picture. When my street buddies weren't available, I had my pet turtle, who was just a bit larger than a quarter coin, and by the way are now banned by the FDA as possible carriers of salmonella. Oh dear me. On lonesome and quiet days, I played the game solitaire with my beloved deck of cards. I usually held out my precious 25 cents for either street rides, the whip or the big swing, or the Good Humor ice cream truck, from which I could purchase a chocolate vanilla Dixie cup with its own wooden spoon, which I then collected to make shanty shacks, put together with glue. These were the options of middle-class youngsters on the streets of Brooklyn in the late 50s or early 60s, and no one was complaining about being bored. So I was confounded to hear millennium children, those born in the 10 or 20 years before or after the year 2000, frequently refrain of, "I am so bored, Ma," even while possessing many more gadgets, gizmos, video games, electronic toys ad nauseum that I'd ever dreamed possible. They had so many choices that perhaps they were suffering from having too many choices, causing an uncomfortable dilemma known as the paradox of choice, book of the same title. No. What these kids were suffering with was something far tragic by far, namely lack of imagination. In the 50s, there once lived 2 best friends living in Los Angeles, but they were young men at the time, named Walt and Art. One day, Walt, the friend with the creative mind, took Art on a 50-mile drive south of the city to the farm country of Orange County. He turned his car off the highway onto a narrow paved road as Art watched in bewilderment, then onto a dirt road. Finally, he pulled his car onto a pair of tractor ruts running into the middle of a huge field. As Walt pulled up beside a dilapidated barn, he hopped out of the car and said with a high degree of enthusiasm, "Art, look at all of this. Isn't it wonderful? I intend to buy it all and build a place where dreams of kids of all ages can come true, and I want you to be my partner." The entire world now understands the image Walt Disney had in mind as he stood with his friend in that field so many years ago. However, Art Linkletter did not. He declined the invitation. He could only ask himself, years later, why didn't I realize that? Millions of people saw Walt Disney's dream become one of the most joyous, profitable, and popular places today, drawing people from around the world for a trip to Disneyland. Today, the Walt Disney Company leads the world in Imagineering, nurturing people's most precious commodity, a creative imagination. And vivid imaginations create the best stuff on earth.
When I came to this writing class, I saw faces from last year and was delighted. But I was even more delighted when Kathleen showed up. Kathleen and I had been chosen volunteer facilitators at Long Island College Hospital's bereavement sessions for families. We had worked closely with the social worker planning activities for kids who had experienced traumatic death in their families. It was the best volunteer experience I've had. Upon seeing Kathleen, we spoke of this experience, and my memory was jogged about all the training I had benefited from as a guidance counselor in the New York City Board of Education, which is now the Department of Education. And so I call this bereavement training. Oklahoma City, that's all one has to say. Everyone is aware that the bombing in Oklahoma City brought on the nation's awareness of the need to deal with mass grieving. Parents, siblings, young children, first responders, teachers, and the whole nation felt the blow of that terror event. Likewise, the nation felt the need to talk about the horrors and to find ways to express their grief. Just after the bombing, I, as a guidance counselor, was offered a bereavement workshop to be held in Newark, New Jersey, a city with a very high rate of violent deaths. We, of course, went through the usual workshop information gathering: what is grief, what behavior might be exhibited by grieving children, and how long is the grieving process. Information gathering from the children: what is grief, what behavior might be exhibited by a grieving child, how long is the grieving process, and what can those close to the child expect. But this workshop was different. We had real kids from Newark neighborhoods with us. We were advised that they each had been involved in a violent death of a loved one. It was suggested that we play games and do crafts, which was my customary choice of activities in working with children. One of the counselors suggested roughhousing with these kids who had experienced such things as a murder in their own home, violent confrontations, and between parents, and all sorts of sudden loss of loved ones. That was an acceptable activity since we had an entire playing field available to us that day. The workshop planners had invited some very special guests who helped us with activities. Several football players from the New York Giants were on hand. When one of those players appeared, one was overwhelmed by their size and how they fill space. So when several appeared, it was a spectacle to behold. Bring on the kids, and these fierce warriors of the football field become floppy puppies as the players picked up kids, swung them around, and lastly lay down on the ground and let them climb on their chests. What was so impressive was the empathy that flowed from these large bodies. It was the happiest these children had been in a very long time, and the best version of the Dr. Seuss's book, Hop on Pop. Now that was a workshop.
My piece is about a yoga group. She struggles to open the heavy door into the community room. Once in, she maneuvers her walker to an empty chair and places her padded cushion on the seat. Her bottom is very bony, and the plastic chairs in this public area offer no comfort during a long sit. 2 years ago, the building manager posted a notice about yoga classes to be offered to all cooperators in the building. The building manager was providing free space to a yoga guru who would start weekly classes. The instructor would charge an hourly fee and each person's contribution depended on the number of students who signed up for each 8-week session. Since the classes were planned for mid-morning, that hour attracted the seniors in the building. We started with one class a week 2 years ago, but today 2 additional classes for advanced, stronger people are also available. Since the beginning, Maura has been a regular participant in the sessions. She is not the oldest member of the group. Another person, Anita, is legally blind, and she is 92. We think Maura is about 88 years of age. While Maura never mirrors the form and agility of our 40-year-old instructor, my gaze is always focused on her. Whenever we transition from one stretch to the next, her body appears to collapse and she moves forward and her eyes soften. I shudder that she will tumble out of her seat onto the unpadded floor, head first. But alas, she is restored but before any disaster occurs, and I am always relieved and thankful. Last year, Maura was missing from the group for a few months. Her daughter informed the building manager that Maura had broken her hip from a fall at home. She had surgery, she had rehab, and finally came back to the class. Upon rejoining the group, she told us about the injury and never spoke of it again. I know very little about Maura outside the class. We only meet for the chair yoga class on Monday and Thursday. I have never met her daughter or grandchildren, who sometimes borrow her car, which she parks in a basement garage. Sometimes I see the vestiges of the long, leggy, vibrant beauty who lived in that body long ago. But time and years demand their price. But during the yoga hour, Maura becomes the same as the rest of the group. We are taller, we are stronger, we are more flexible. And all limitations are left at the community room entrance door, where we park any walkers or canes. For that hour, we are practically 20 years old again.
This story is based on an actual prompt that I gave. Yeah, it was actually my prompt. And it was something like, I don't know if I have the exact wording, but the sound of a train in the distance helps someone write the last line of a poem. Okay? I'll scream. Do it. Didn't take my cough drops. I left. All right. Okay. Okay. No cell phones. No texting. No eating.
Just as you say that.
Kathleen came late, I think, when I made the announcement. You did. All right. Let me get this in before the fire trucks start again. So. Anyway, it's called The Last Line. Did everybody get the prompt? You know, the sound of a train in the distance helps him or her write the last line of a poem. Okay? It inspires them or gets them to write. Okay. You'll figure it out as I'm reading, I think. Just one more line and it would be finished. It reminded her of laying out the last card on top of a house of cards, so that one wrong move, one unnecessary breath in the wrong direction, and everything would collapse. She had put so much already into this poem. Just one more line, she kept saying to herself. Just one line to conclude the last couplet. Tormented by the last terrible light of the summer sky, something, something, something. Cry, she asked herself. Die, she uttered quietly, fearfully under her breath. So many lines rhymed with sky. Too many, she thought. She had perhaps written herself into a corner, but was there really a corner in this case, but an entire boulevard of rhymes, moving towards her from long distances, looking so promising at first, but the closer they got, the clearer and more defined they became, the more ordinary and lifeless, like old friends or relatives you had once spent too much time with and asked nicely never to return again. Cry, die, sigh, no thank you, she muttered to herself. What about why, she thought. Tormented by the last terrible light of the summer sky, I sit or lie or stand or slouch or bend over or leap or jump or something and just ask why. No, she thought. Besides, hadn't she heard that already before? Something she heard or read? Some funeral, maybe? Already she was losing the elation she had felt earlier, like she had won the race when she hadn't even gotten to the finish line. And wasn't there that marathon runner who collapsed from exhaustion just before the finish line and had to be dragged by his friends across it? Who do I know, she thought, who could drag me across the finish line? Give me the rhyme I need to finish this poem. Besides, wouldn't that too disqualify, negate the victory? The victory of the race, the victory of finishing this poem on my own. Oh, she could feel the frustration, the anger seeping through now. How damn disappointing. It absolutely nagged at her. It was like some parasite eating away all the poetic sensibility left inside of her. It had been months since she had written anything, ever since Maurice had gone. All her life she had been saying goodbye to people, and she never seemed to mind. At the very most, and even the very least, it was something she could write a poem about. She had written a whole volume full of poetry she called Leavings. In fact, whenever she felt herself go dry, whenever she felt she would never write another word, she actually hoped someone she knew would leave, or even someone she didn't know. Sometimes she'd go down to the train station and listen in on others' conversations, on their farewells to each other. When others waved to their friends and loved ones, she too would wave, as if she knew them, as if she too were a loved one, and then she'd go home and more likely than not write a poem about it. People left her town quite a bit, so she was glad she lived in it. And the train that took them away looked weary and tired, as if it were dragging itself, chugging towards some unknown destination. She liked that. She liked that she could see a train like that, could see it not just for its mechanical properties, but as a metaphor for its humanness as well, for its aches and pains, its groans and grunts, for its physical limitations and spiritual yearnings. On one particular Saturday, a day when lots of people seemed to be leaving town, she found herself in an unusual position, in a dark corner of the train station where she could see as many people and hear as many farewells as possible. One such farewell involved a very good-looking, so she thought, young man who seemed sensitive and full-lipped as a poet and as firm and resolved as a soldier. Was he going off to war, she wondered, or to a poetry conference? It was hard to tell until his father said rather too loud and ironic for public consumption, "Just don't get yourself killed," which could very well have referred to the hostile reception of an audience full of critics at a poetry conference, though more likely to a war, of which there were several going on at the same time. Certainly, she thought to herself, smiling, there must be more wars now than poetry conferences. Either way, it was one of those statements fathers make to separate themselves from the maudlin, sentimental farewells of the women in the family, and which perhaps at the same time allow for a terrible sense of insecurity and fear on the father's part. This reaction by the father definitely had teeth in it and was something she could write a poem about. Indeed, she went home happy that day, Her creative juices flowing so that everything she looked at, the trees, the tombstones in the cemetery along the highway, the hardware store with its photos of former and present employees of the month, seemed a little more tragic and profound than usual. But by the time she had gotten no more than a few lines through another poem, she had fallen in love with the young man and could not stop thinking about him. How was that possible, she asked herself. But then she remembered just how just after his father had said those words to him, how the young man looked around and suddenly locked eyes with her, how they had seemed so tragic, so painfully beautiful. It was she, not him, who would be the first to look away. And now she could do nothing else but think about him, this poet soldier, whose gentle yet terrified eyes she hoped would come back for her one day, and love her twice a day, morning and night. And those eyes would be the first thing she would look into each morning, and the last thing each night. And then she would finally know the very depths where human love could take her. But now, all she could do, every day, twice a day, was to go down to the station to see if he might be on a train, returning from either a poetry conference or a war. Then weeks and even months went by, and still she would go down to the train station, every day, twice a day, and still he had not returned. Then one day, she decided to go back to the poem she had begun to write about him months earlier. She called the poem Waiting, but it was not just about waiting, but waiting with a sense of dread that was too real, that lay not within but outside the boundaries of poetry, outside her imagination, that lay like a landmine, a booby trap, always invisible, always just beyond her blind grasp, so that the lines she wrote felt so heavy she could barely lift them from her mind, from her imagination, onto the page. Then came the morning she looked into the sky and saw a light she could never describe, which was like a terrible wound, a stretch of reddish-purple death streaked against the sky. It tormented her, and it was at that moment she knew he was gone, a man she never knew, but whom she loved with every fiber of her being. She knew now it was some war he'd be coming home from, and not a poetry conference. And that night, when she heard from her window the weary, weary train chugging, chugging, chugging back home, she knew it would keep coming, and she knew it was bringing him home. And she knew nothing, and no one could stop it, not even a poet. And that's when she looked back at her poem, looked helplessly at the vast blankness just below that last line she had written about the tormenting streak of light in the sky. But when she heard the last chug of the train, the last blasting of its horn, the final agonizing screech of its brakes, she began to write. Hey, just don't get yourself killed. Just don't get yourself killed. Just don't get yourself killed. She kept writing. Just don't get yourself killed, she wrote over and over again. That was the line. That was the line I was looking for all the time, she said to herself, as she watched her poem collapse like a house of cards.
Wow.